You're looking at one of the most powerful and, honestly, hopeful images from a deeply divided time, and it makes you wonder about something that feels more important today than ever before.
I mean, let's face it, we live in a pretty tense time, right? Competition between global powers is fierce, and it can feel like the world is kind of fracturing. But at the same time, we're all facing these massive challenges, climate change, pandemics, you name it, that no single country can possibly solve on its own. So how do you build bridges when it feels like everyone is busy building walls? Well, it turns out, history has some pretty fascinating answers.
And maybe the most dramatic answer comes from 440 miles above the Earth. It's a mission called Apollo-Soyuz, a moment that seemed totally impossible, a symbol of cooperation at the absolute peak of a global standoff.
Now, to really get the impact of this, you have to transport yourself back in time. This was the Cold War. The United States and the Soviet Union were locked in a nuclear arms race. They were fighting these proxy wars all over the globe. The entire world was basically on a knife's edge. And yet somehow, above all that chaos and conflict, they decided to meet. But here's the thing. This handshake didn't just happen out of the blue. Nope. It was the result of almost 2 decades of quiet, persistent work behind the scenes. It all started with these small steps. Proposals for joint missions back in the early 60s, then a formal agreement in 1972, and just countless hours of scientists and engineers from 2 opposing superpowers working side by side toward a single goal.
And that's the crucial point you got to remember. This was a deliberate choice. It wasn't just some cool technical achievement. It was a political decision to find common ground, literally above the fray. It was a calculated act of diplomacy.
And the result was this incredible moment. An American astronaut and a Soviet cosmonaut opening their hatches in orbit and shaking hands through this specially designed docking module that connected their 2 completely different spacecraft. It sent such a powerful message to the entire world that even in the darkest of times, we can find a way to connect.
But the story of international cooperation doesn't start with something as grand and dramatic as a space mission. It actually builds up from much more, well, down-to-earth problems. The origins are surprisingly practical.
You see, the first real wave of global teamwork wasn't about ending wars or signing these huge peace treaties, what historians call high politics. Instead, it grew out of low politics. You know, the nitty-gritty need to solve mundane, everyday problems that were getting in the way of progress and commerce back in the 19th century.
And the solution they came up with? Well, they were these things called public international unions, or PIUs for short. These were literally the world's very first international organizations, and their job was super simple: get countries to agree on common rules for stuff that crossed borders.
Just think about it for a second. How do you send a telegram from Germany to France if their systems can't talk to each other? That's why they created the International Telegraph Union. Or how do you mail a letter from Paris all the way to Peru and make sure it actually gets there? The Universal Postal Union. See? These organizations weren't about big ideologies. They were about making a newly interconnected world actually function. So this model of practical, problem-solving cooperation, it really laid the groundwork for something much bigger. Over time, science itself became this primary tool for diplomacy, and it evolved into these really sophisticated new forms.
And we can see 2 really distinct models pop up. On one side, you have something called the Pugwash conferences. During the Cold War, these were these informal, totally off-the-record meetings where top scientists from the US and the Soviet Union could talk freely about the existential threat of nuclear weapons, away from all the politicians. It was what we call a Track 2 dialogue, influencing policy from the outside. But then on the other side, you have a formal intergovernmental body like the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. It was created specifically to give governments official, authoritative scientific advice to guide international policy.
And the IPCC's work became so critical, so essential to global stability, that in 2007, it was jointly awarded the Nobel Peace Prize for its efforts to build and share knowledge about climate change. Pretty amazing.
So what does this all mean for us today? What's the big takeaway? Well, these historical examples, from telegraphs to space stations to climate reports, they actually offer a really clear blueprint for how we can foster cooperation in our own divided time. Okay, so modern science diplomacy, you can really boil it down to 3 key jobs. First, it's a form of public diplomacy. It's about showing the world your country's scientific skill and your collaborative spirit. Second, it's a vital back channel. It keeps lines of communication open when the official political talks have totally broken down. And third, it builds the actual legal and institutional frameworks you need for future, more ambitious projects, just like Apollo-Soyuz paved the way for the International Space Station.
And this right here,
might be the most important lesson of all. The goal of these efforts isn't always to solve the big, messy geopolitical conflicts overnight. Sometimes it's just about taking a modest, practical first step on an issue you can both agree on, like astronaut safety or sharing climate data. It's about finding that one small thing to build on.
You know, George Low, the NASA administrator who oversaw the whole Apollo-Soyuz mission, he put it perfectly. He said, "We live in a rather dangerous world. Anything that we can do to make it a little less dangerous is worth doing." That handshake in space, it couldn't end the Cold War, but it did build just enough trust to make the world a slightly safer place. And that's something.
Which really just leaves us with a final question. In our time, with our own huge challenges and deep divisions, what's going to be our handshake in space? Where can we find that common ground, whether it's in AI or public health or exploring the universe, where we can take that first, modest step toward a less dangerous world?